The third matchup of the weekend is the New Orleans Saints, third seed, -8, versus the Minnesota Vikings, the 6th seed. So Minnesota is traveling to New Orleans. A very big injury that I just saw for the Vikings is that Eric Kendricks is hurt, banged up. The question is, will he play? Because I think that's a major loss if he does not suit up for the Vikings. Not only because he is very good and good in all facets of the game. He was actually PFF's one of their top-ranked linebackers in pass coverage this year, which I think is a huge deal when you're talking about covering Alvin Kamara. If Eric Kendricks is not out there, that shifts the entire defensive approach from Zimmer and the Vikings defense. So that's huge, and I think that could contain Alvin Kamara from having a big game in the passing game. Teams have kind of gotten better at defending Alvin Kamara over this past season, though. He has not been the same player in terms of his effectiveness versus defenses in the passing game than he was a couple seasons ago or last year even. Minneapolis Miracle Revenge, that is the storyline for this game. Can the Saints get their revenge this time in the Superdome? I think this game could be a shootout. Now, what I like about this game from defensive perspectives, let's look at both defenses. So Zimmer versus Sean Payton, I think that's a great matchup from a coaching perspective. Offensive guy in Payton versus defensive guy in Zimmer, two of the best at their craft. They clearly have certain things that they love to do. You know, Sean Payton loves his screens. Sean Payton loves his little quick passing game, and he's very tricky. You know, Taysom Hill, all the different things that they do. Zimmer, primarily, you know, he can take away some of those plays, I think. I think he can take away the quick screens. I think he could take away the quick passes for the most part with his design on defense to cloud out those areas that New Orleans really likes to attack offensively. When you look at the opposite side, where do I feel like Minnesota's offense can take advantage and New Orleans' offense can take advantage? The weakness of both teams defensively are their secondary. So what this game really comes down to is the pass defense and the pass offense of both teams, in my opinion. I think Dalvin Cook is excellent, but the Saints are really good versus the run. So Dalvin Cook will have some yardage. He'll make his plays. But I feel like it's going to be on Kirk Cousins, Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, Kyle Rudolph to make plays in the passing game versus the Saints secondary. And it's going to be on Drew Brees, Michael Thomas, maybe Alvin Kamara, Jared Cook, these guys to make plays in the passing game. I think that Michael Thomas is going to have a massive game here. Xavier Rhodes is horrible this year. I mean, if they put Xavier Rhodes on Michael Thomas, you might as well say goodnight. I think they will have to double team Michael Thomas. If they're smart, they'll double team Michael Thomas because there is no way they can single cover him with any corner they have. They just do not have a guy that can do that. Simply, they can't. And Sean Payton is so creative with the way that he utilizes Michael Thomas that it often is difficult to actually double team him. And the amount that the Vikings actually play zone, it also makes it difficult to double team a player in zone coverage. I mean, you could put players in certain areas where Michael Thomas, you think he's going to be on certain downs, but you can't really say, okay, two guys, you're going to follow Michael Thomas and just one inside, one outside, or one over top, one underneath. You can't necessarily do that in zone coverage as much. So it's interesting from that perspective. I think Michael Thomas will have 10 plus catches in this game pretty easily. And if he doesn't, I think that means the Vikings have a very good chance of winning. And I think if you look at that stat line at the end of the game, the box score, that would be one of the box score things that indicate whether the Saints won or they lost. If Michael Thomas has under 100 yards and under 10 catches, then I think the Vikings are more likely to have been in this game closer or win this game. If the Saints and Michael Thomas has like 8 to 13, 15 catches, somewhere in there, and 100 plus yards, then I think the Saints won or they won comfortably. Either way. I think Drew Brees will be able to effectively attack the secondary, and I could see him hitting one or two big plays in this game versus this secondary. It is difficult versus like a guy like Harrison Smith in the back end because he's very smart, But I just do not like the corners of the Vikings. I don't think they can really play man versus the Saints, and that's a really a true disadvantage when you're playing the Saints, because you can't. It's so hard to take away all the different scheme things that Sean Payton likes to do when you can't play a lot of man. And then on the other side, I think the Saints, a guy like Cam Jordan could have his way here. You look at the offensive line of the Vikings, they're good on the run offensive line. But when you're talking about pass blocking, I mean, they're just average. They have nobody that PFF ranks over 27th. They're both of their tackles are 30th or below. Their right guard in Klein is 41st. Jordan moves everywhere. They could line him up on Klein. They could line him up on the right. They could line him up on the left. I think all of those matchups are good for Cam Jordan. And I think that pass rush can get after Kirk Cousins on big downs. One thing that I like about the Vikings offense versus the Saints defense is Adam Thielen in this game. I think if Adam Thielen is fully healthy, he should have a big game, because I see Marshawn Lattimore taking Stephon Diggs more often than not, meaning that I believe that Adam Thielen will likely rather see a lot of double teams or see one of the weaker corners for the Saints, meaning that he should have more action in this game. I also think Kyle Rudolph needs to have a big game, and they need to be creative in the ways that they attack the outside of the Saints defense, because the Saints, you don't want to run directly at their defense. You want to try and find a way to stretch them out and run to the outside, the same way that the 49ers attack them in the running game, which is interesting because Minnesota runs a very similar offense to the 49ers in terms of their zone rushing attack. So if Dalvin Cook is able to get to that edge and seal that edge, and he can get some big yardage on the outside, the Saints will be in trouble, because the Saints, they count on being able to stop the run and putting offenses in uncomfortable third downs. So if they're not able to stop the run, it actually allows the Vikings to be able to dictate the play, the way they want to play, right? Because that's what their offense is about. It's through Dalvin Cook, and if it's effective through Dalvin Cook, then Kirk Cousins really can attack that secondary. But if Dalvin Cook is being shut down, then it will be a very difficult game and possibly a blowout for the Saints. Demario Davis will be a big deal, I think, in this game, because he'll have a lot of that Dalvin Cook action, whether that's in the passing game or the run game. And I think, it really comes down to Drew Brees and Kirk Cousins, because I think both teams will be doing well versus the run game. And at the end of the day, I can't bet against Drew Brees versus Kirk Cousins in the Superdome in a game where he could get massive revenge. I'm going with Drew Brees. I'm going with the Saints to win. I actually think the Vikings can keep this within 8 points. So I'm going to take the Vikings plus 8. The more that I talk about it, the more I think it will be a closer game. So I'm going to take the Vikings plus the 8, but I think the Saints will find a way to win. So I'm going to say the score will be 31-24 for the Saints, just covering the spread for Minnesota. So that's the first game for the NFC.